right. Yay! Yeah, I gotta wake up too. Yeah, so my research is about intuition as an aspect of knowledge making, and I'm exploring the formative dimensions of intuition in the professional practice of 3 contemporary artists versus 3 business executives. And yesterday, actually, I think Tim said something like pointed towards intuition, and he said, "Oh, I don't want to talk about intuition. I don't want to get to like mystic here, but I actually think that we need to start talking about intuition if we want to be understanding cognition in any way." So here we go. I'm an artist. This is one of my images. I also I teach video, photography, and performance art. And I have worked long-term in the media production industry, and I've also co-founded my own media production company in Berlin, which I have co-managed for many years. And art has been a guide system for my beliefs throughout my life, and intuitive processes frequently direct my art practice, which has guided me in many ways and has helped me build my personal knowledge. My art practice has helped me ask questions, understand matters, make meanings, and find personal value in life. I was born and raised in Germany. However, I do not come from a common Western background. I have had an Indian Hindu father and a German Protestant mother, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s in a small, homogeneous, Catholic, tiny village in southwest Germany. And therefore, I had diverse religious insights and influences, and having these diverse religious and cultural influences made me prematurely question my cultural and my religious background and realize early on that there are diverse ways to believe and various perspectives on knowledge. And over the years, I have gradually come to trust the experience of intuition as a valid source of knowledge making. And this has generated an interest and an urge of importance in me that led me to explore the experience of intuition. Psychologist, educator, and author Frances Vaughan suggested in her book Awakening Intuition in 1979 that intuition is knowing, quote, knowing without being able to explain how we know. And the word intuition comes from the Latin verb intuere, which is generally translated as to look inside or to contemplate, which may be understood as learning and being educated from inside ourselves. Intuition is also etymologically adopted from tuition, and related to meanings aimed at protection, guardian, and tutor. These meanings refer to the idea of looking within for guidance and protection. So why is it important to study intuition? Well, probably everyone is employing intuition in their lives. The awareness of it and therefore the control over this human ability is lacking. And Western society tends to favor the rational, logical, and empirical reasoning over intuitive knowing. However, intuition and reason do not stand aligned against one another. One was never meant to supplant the other, but merely to balance and to complement. And even though intuition is not fully understood, it is an acceptable and commonly used decision-making tool. Research, especially in management settings, has shown that intuitive processes are critical and essential for effective strategic decision-making. Without understanding intuition, it is impossible to develop any meaningful conceptualization of cognition. UTT, the unconscious thought theory developed by Dutch social psychologist Dijksterhuis and American scholar in the field of management and organization Nordgren in 2006, proposes that while unconscious thought is often expected to lead to choices of lower quality because of its assumed lack of precision compared to conscious thought, unconscious thought actually leads to more accurate choices than conscious thought under complex conditions. So this notion could be very beneficial and helpful to our lives in the current very complex world. According to Lynn Robinson, author of 5 books on intuition, intuition is something we are all hardwired with. We all possess this mechanism to varying degrees, as well as the capacity to develop it further. A neuroscientist, psychiatrist, and as she calls herself, medical intuitive Mona Lisa Schultz, suggests that by using intuition, one can strengthen one's mind, body consciousness, and empower oneself to create a healthier and happier life. So how I came to study intuition was through a pilot study titled Art as a Vehicle for Spirituality, exploring spiritual aspects in the practice of 3 contemporary artists, which I conducted in 2014, and in which I explored the intersection of art, science, and spirituality. And this is actually the universal sign for art, science, and spirituality. And I recognized in this study that intuition may be placed in the intersection of the 3, and this finding raised my curiosity for intuition. The participating artists described receiving ideas through intuitive processes as well as making decisions via intuition. The study defined 3 stages of art making, which were the idea stage, the creation stage, and the completion stage. The idea stage is outlined by visions, dreams, emotions, and feelings. The creation stage is characterized by an immersion with material and subject and by feeling transported through the art-making process. And the completion stage implies a feeling of guidance and assurance. The 3 artists, and this is an image of one of the artists I worked with, of the pilot study, who worked in diverse media such as performance art, photography, painting, and installation, emphasized that their art practice is deeply guided by intuition. For example, ideas were described as being received. They suddenly appear in the artist's minds, which suggests that intuition could be regarded as a conscious commonality between earthly knowledge and a higher spiritual knowledge. None of the artists knew where exactly their ideas were coming from. They perceived them to come from somewhere other than themselves or somewhere within themselves. One participating artist stated that art has been a space to define ideas of our own spirit. Another said that sometimes he looks at one of his images and thinks, quote, "I wonder where it came from, because it doesn't look like I made it." And the third artist stated that through her art, spirit could connect and speak. Her spirit could connect and speak. This is, again, another image of one of the artists I worked with. These accounts confirmed to me that intuitive processes are part of art practice. It made me curious about the dimensions of intuition and about how intuitive processes might be a part and essential to life itself. Furthermore, I asked myself, if the procedures and forms of intuiting in art practice differ from intuiting in other professions or other situations in life, and if yes, how does it present and manifest itself? Could art practice be a medium to learn about the dimensions of intuition? And furthermore, could art practice facilitate developing methods of intuiting and help become aware of the powers of intuition? If so, in what way? When looking at research on intuition, I found that many recent studies are done in the field of entrepreneurship and management. Managers often rely on patterns and intuition to make quick decisions. Intuitive decision-making can be very beneficial in the business world and differs from rational processes in several ways. However, when looking at the so far known dimensions of intuition, guided by Australian scholar Martha Sinclair, who developed the Handbook of Intuition Research in 2011, and another book, Handbook of Research Methods on Intuition, in 2014, I realized that there are certain differences of the dimensions that management practice and art practice employ. There are many different aspects of intuition, such as processing systems, processing types, processing style, involvement of effect, main function, type of information, time acquisition of information, location of information, and type of outcome. The most apparent differences between the practice of art and the practice of management, however, seem to lie in the processing style, time acquisition of information, and the location of the information received. Intuition in management practice seems to rely on intuitive processes that draw from memory and past experience, employing association of effect and pattern matchmaking. Art practice, however, presents dimensions of intuition that have been so far mainly disregarded from research, such as retrieving information from a non-local source that can carry knowledge about the future that is completely novel and not bound to memory or past experience. In her book, Technologies on Intuition, art historian Jennifer Fisher in 2007 suggests that intuition is a core aspect to processes of coming to know in aesthetic practice and experience. Many artists habitually rely on extra-rational means of understanding. She proposes that intuition is always contradictory and paradoxical, entailing the simultaneity of faith and suspicion, openness and skepticism. The artists presented in Fisher's book reveal a range of practices employed in their art making that use intuition in their methodology, such as divination, channeling, automatic writing, clairvoyance, and meditation. Fisher advocates that such engagements involve real undertaking and commitments that make conscious and mind receptive to effectively access, channel, or give energy. Revelations of intuition are understood instantaneously through a subtle sensorium in addition to the physical faculties of sight, hearing, touch, and smell, and taste. This faculty of meta-perception involves inner visions, clairaudience, or clairvoyance, which implicates past, present, and future, and can comprise symbols or psychic meditations. Some artists describe clairaudience as feeling like taking dictation from an internal or disembodied voice. Clairsentience describes a perception beyond the ordinary, which involves phenomena such as smelling danger or tasting a flavor that indicates a particular presence. Intuition, as described here, relates simultaneously to both embodied perception and to awareness that goes beyond the 5 common senses. Intuition partakes in physical cognition. However, their methods of reception involves extrasensory perception, the 6th sense, which largely occurs in precognitive experience. Artists often develop the conscious ability to engage intuitive insight and effective cognition to open themselves to extra-rational modes of thought and states of bodily awareness. Fisher suggests that intuition also plays a role in exceeding discrete notions of individuality, such as the phenomena of transmedium, the self becomes other. In addition, intuition is able to facilitate group consciousness, for example, in the amplified awareness that can arise in group meditation. Art involved with this understanding of intuition may therefore disrupt notions of established boundaries that appear essential within the rational Western philosophy. Though these notions of intuition have barely entered Western research yet, research on intuition in art might help shake some of the dated modes of looking at intuition and cognition in Western philosophy. To become aware of the specific notions and dimensions of intuition in art practice, it appears reasonable to compare these concepts with notions of intuition in management. Therefore, my dissertation research question is, given that many visual artists claim that intuition guides their art practice, what can we learn about the formative dimensions of intuition through investigating the practices and experiences of 3 visual artists versus 3 business executives? My sub-questions are, does the role of art practice play a distinctive role in the conscious awareness of intuition? If yes, in what way? And does the investigation of 3 visual artists' practice show that art making facilitates developing abilities of intuition? If yes, in what manner? So my anticipated study is I am going to work with 3 contemporary artists, which are actually, I'm planning on working with the artists that I have been working on with in the pilot study, because I already know them a little bit, and I already know that they do believe that intuition guides their practice. And then I'm going to have 3 business executives. It's not clear yet with whom I'm going to be working. I have one person in mind who has a event management company, but the other 2 I don't know yet. And they're all going to be in between 35 and 55. I want them to be like in this age because expertise also plays a role in intuition, and I also want to have them be still practicing in whatever profession they are. The data collection, I will have initial interviews at the beginning, and then I will have them online journal for 6 months. And every week I will be asking them to submit whatever they have experienced, even if they have not experienced anything regarding intuition. I want them to post something just saying that nothing happened. They also are able to, besides posting text, they can also submit images or sounds or songs or anything that is related to intuition, because sometimes it's really hard to explain these experiences in language. So I just want to open that up, that they have more ways to communicate whatever they're experiencing. And then there will be a follow-up interview after the 6 months. And I will also have a researcher journal where I'm going to be monitoring myself, my biases, but also my developments and how I come slowly to conclusions. My data organization and analysis will be I will be transcribing right away after the interviews. There will be a back and forth between the interviewees and me. I will give them the transcription so that we can go over any errors or misunderstandings. Then I will be rereading those interviews, and I will be rereading the journal entries until I feel comfortable with the material. Then there will be an initial coding, development of categories, then a focus coding, then again a development of most essential themes. The data will then be organized regarding those themes, and then I will be building 2 cases, one for the artists and one for the business executives. And then I will be comparing these 2 cases and discuss whatever I will find and interpret the data. So my theoretical framework is mainly built on 4 people. One on physicist Fritjof Capra, which says that Western society tends to favor the rational, logical, and empirical reasoning over intuitive knowing, yet both the rational and the intuitive are necessary, supplementing one another for a fuller understanding of the world. Then the second one is scholar in business studies Peter Ping Li. From 2014, he advocates an integration of the Eastern philosophy of wisdom with the Western philosophy of knowledge toward a geocentric meta-paradigm of cognition with a framework of intuition at its core. And then neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, who says the feeling generated by an emotion can lead to a consciousness. This awareness helps us to think, plan, and ultimately survive. According to the somatic marker hypothesis, emotions are not independent from the cognitive process. Rather, they inspire us to feel, imagine, and ultimately understand the universe and our lives in novel ways. And then researcher and author in the field of parapsychology, Dean Radin, and this is where it probably becomes wacky for most people, he is an advocate for the non-local theories and suggests that we might be able to link to and obtain information from external non-local sources, and this information could also be from the future and about the future. So intuitive processes appear to be essential in our lives and beneficial to cognition. Art practice may facilitate developing intuitive processes. The diverse qualities, methods, and techniques of art that allow for alternative exploration, expression, and knowledge-making should be sensibly employed regarding the practice of learning and teaching. Art education may aid applying and enhancing abilities of intuition. Given that art practice may be one way to kindle and develop abilities such as intuition, instead of an elimination of art education, an integration of art in education appears reasonable to be considered. An art-integrated approach of learning and teaching might awaken and strengthen abilities such as intuition that appear to be beneficial to cognition, education, and our lives. Research on intuition in the field of art practice might bring fresh insights about the phenomenon. An engagement in research about and practice of intuition in art making may help to create space for Eastern and Western philosophies to reunite, which may generate a more holistic way of viewing, understanding, and living our lives. I'm conducting this research not only because I am interested in intuition or supporting an integration of Eastern philosophies in the Western world, but most importantly to highlight the potentials of art practice and the significance of art and art education in our lives. Thank you.
I guess my first question might be easy, I don't know. So I was thinking a little bit about the difference. Is there any difference between intuition and what people consider tacit knowledge? Is there a more like spiritual component to intuition, or is it just different terms for the same thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are different ways of looking at intuition, so there are different definitions for intuition, and I think that's something that I want to be like working on and contributing to make more clear what can it be, what can it not be. Maybe we have to find different terms too, because I sometimes see the way that intuition is looked at, for example, in the management research, is very different from what I see as understood as intuition in the art practice. So it's a good question. It's something that I'm investigating and thinking about, and maybe, yeah, we have to find undercategories, subcategories, something like that.
So I was curious about the artists who have talked about intuition being important to their practice, and I'm curious if you feel that way, like is it an important part of your personal art practice? But also in conjunction with that, is the result of intuition always like a positive one? Are they like, do they assign their best works or the works that are the most meaningful to them as a product of that intuition?
Well, to answer the first question, I said that at the beginning. Yes, I am very guided by intuition in any ways in my life, but my art practice for sure too. I mean, my art practice is practically my life. So yes, I'm guided by intuition. And the second one, for sure, intuition can mislead in a great way. So it doesn't always have to be a successful outcome. It can be a great failure, and that's a thing to learn too, when to like listen to our intuitions and when to not listen to our intuitions. Our intuitions are not always right. But it's always not, our deliberate thought is not always right. So, yeah. You know.
And do you think, I know you're like in the preliminary stages, do you think this is a capacity that everyone has, or is it for artists that are keenly aware of it, or, I mean,
I think it's a capacity that everybody has, and I think it's a capacity that can be developed. I do think that artists have it more because they are developing it through the art practice, because the art practice just is one that facilitates that kind of working and that kind of like having to trust your gut feeling. But I do think that it can be developed in anybody, and that's why I'm saying that art practice is very important for anybody, or it can be very important. I'm sure there are other ways to learn intuition too, but it can be one form to learn it. And I do think that becoming more aware of our intuition in the world becoming more complex and more complex is very important.
I don't know if other people have.
Oh, never mind. Just came with the mic. Thank you so much, Jesse, for your presentation. My question is, I noticed that in your sample participants, or the participants you selected to sample for this, or interview, should I say, I believe it was contemporary artists, and also business executives. I'm just curious as to the choices there. Like, what led you to specifically look for maybe some exchanges between therein, or to choose those two different types of groups, given that intuition is maybe something that is shared from a wide variety of people, or even, it seems maybe even employment occupations? I'm just curious as to like what kind of led you to select those two different types of sample participants.
Well, the first one, choosing artists, is pretty clear because I am investigating art practice. The second one comes out of research. There's a lot of research, like I said, most research in the recent years is done on management, probably because most money is in there, I would assume, and entrepreneurship. There's of course also research in high-risk professions such as nurses, firemen, things like that. But I did find the most data that I could find and that I can work with in the best way, I think, and comparing to art practice is business executives.
You make the distinction between Eastern conceptualization and Western conceptualization. I'm very curious to know of what constitutes the Eastern thought, in the sense where it is borrowed from. Is it Eastern philosophies that help you understand this conceptualization? And if it's Eastern, if you've come across Eastern thinkers, philosophers, who actually shape your understanding of intuition.
Yeah, it's basically based on Chinese philosophy, and it comes from the Chinese Buddhism beliefs, and intuition in the Chinese way of believing is seen as very differently as in our Western research. Things such as ambivalence and the complexness and ambiguity and open-endedness and everything is very embraced in the Eastern philosophy. So the way of learning there is not, it's more inclusive. So these two systems of our deliberative mind and our intuitive mind are integrated in the Chinese philosophy, and they don't see it as so dualistic as we do. So that's where that notion comes from. Did that?
Yes. Thank you so much. Perfectly answered my question. And a second follow-up question, which also borrows from Jason's. So the artists that you selected, did they have a grounding in either of these theories, or is it not necessary to the study that they have a conceptualization or that they need to borrow from particular philosophies for them to have certain beliefs in their intuition?
It's not necessary at all to have any kind of background in these philosophies, but as I said, the artists are borrowed from my pilot study, and so I knew about them that they do have like interests in spirituality, let's say it like that.
Well, my question is, when you talk about the artist practice and what is into it, within that, how do you draw, thank you, how do you draw the line between what is intuitive and what is not?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's something I'm investigating. So where do we start? Where does intuition start, and where does the conscious mind begin then? It's very hard to do this because any kind of intuitive processing happens in either unconscious or pre-conscious conditions, right? So that's why I do have to rely on the notions. And again, I have to actually rely on like the participants' intuition after intuiting, because they have to tell me about the experiences. They have to tell me when they think that they did something out of intuition, when they think they used any kind of intuitive processing. So it's a good question, but it's a question that I can't, that probably nobody yet can answer, and I don't know if we're ever going to be really able to answer that because of the elusive state of intuition, and because of that it is happening in pre-consciousness. I don't know if it can be like, maybe it can be, which is not part of my study, but there are studies that try to measure this by brain waves and heart waves.
Well, adding to that is, would you, let's say, as you get feedback from the artist saying, well, I think that I did that as a result of some intuitive experience, would you like find, well, I don't think that that's that intuitive from like your point of view as a researcher? I mean, I'm wondering if you have questioned at some point that something that you get from the artist, you might think or question if that's really intuitive or not. Does that make sense?
If I understood it right, so if I wouldn't be thinking that they're correct, that they're saying that comes from intuitive,
Yeah,
then
exactly.
I
If
would
you
question it.
ever
That
question
would
that,
be
yeah.
something that would come up in my discussion then, yeah, for sure. I mean, like if they come up with something and I would be thinking, well, that cannot be, then I would definitely highlight it, but yeah, I cannot, I cannot prove what is their intuition or not, but I would definitely highlight it and would say, well, I I don't think that this was intuitive. I do think that this was deliberative.
I just have one comment, and maybe it's a suggestion, that you have the artists versus the business people. And that implies an antagonistic relationship or a dichotomistic relationship. I would change the versus. If you suspect that businessmen are also intuitive, as are artists, it's not antagonistic or in opposition. So maybe and instead of versus.
Yeah.
Just a
sure.
comment.
Sure, that totally makes sense. I mean, like in my little image I showed there shows that I do believe that there are overlapping parts and some differences. Yeah, I didn't mean to like put it as antagony and my second language. Thank you.